most of my onboarding was actually over virtual meetings anyway. So in a weird way, although I had a very brief opportunity to meet my colleagues and get onboarded in person, I think that helped me understand that the fundamental parts of being onboarded or starting a new job virtually are pretty much the same. Yes, there are a few things that are different, and even the process of looking for jobs is different, but at least in my experience, I found it much easier. So, for example, when I was trying to figure out, well, what's my next step after consulting, and how can I tie the experiences and skills that I'm building from consulting and working with different clients to be more aligned with something that I'm just genuinely more passionate about, I was able to spend a lot more time just setting up 25-minute or 30-minute virtual coffee chats just by messaging people on LinkedIn. And the time that it would have taken me to, go somewhere, meet someone in person for a coffee chat, like I got back to honestly spend more time updating my resume or working or figuring out and reflecting, well, what do I actually want from this? So from my experience, even starting something new, it's definitely a little bit more awkward, but meeting people and starting a new job is awkward anyways. The nice thing is I got to sit in my pajamas, bottom down, and take my time and have more control over my calendar, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to talk later about my experience looking for something new and using LinkedIn and social media to help with that. But yeah, that's been my experience so far.
Well, great.
Oh, sorry. Did you want me to?
No, please, Soja. I was just going to pass the ball over to you.
Okay, thank you. I think my experience was a little bit different because I started a job in academia, which already sort of presents its own challenges and is a very limited field in any circumstance. And so this time last year, I was facing an academic market in the humanities with 10 positions in my field in the US and Canada, and pretty much worldwide. So things weren't looking that bright for me particularly. And it was a very interesting experience to sort of come to Miami and interview and do the campus visit while the COVID scare had just sort of started, and it had just arrived. The virus had just arrived in Seattle. So I don't think anyone really could have imagined that a month later there would be a hiring freeze or any of that, any of the things that happened that ended up rolling out. But I mean, I always say that I got really lucky in the sense of my offer came quite literally 2 weeks before all universities stopped hiring. And some universities actually had candidates and didn't go through with their campus visits, et cetera. So there's that side of it. But I think now that I'm on the other sort of side, on the other end of the aisle as an educator, my main priority at this point hasn't been really focusing on the challenges of getting to know my colleagues virtually, because I know that will come anyway. But more so just like making sure that my students feel fulfilled in the online format, which is, part of being a university student is the fact that you get to go to seminars and have these discussions with people, and it's supposed to be an enriching experience. So for me, I think one of the things that helped me cope with the uncertainty of this time period was channeling that energy into helping my students get the most out of it on Zoom, trying to make it as engaging as possible, and then sort of paying it forward to other people who are at that weird transitional juncture between graduate school and academia. So I've been helping a lot of my colleagues who weren't as lucky as I was with mock interviews and trying to update CVs and things like that. So for me, it was just about reconfiguring where I'm putting my energy and making sure it wasn't just about me in that period.
Yes, it's really well said. And Wajia, you sort of come to mind as well as someone that started a career just a few weeks before the pandemic. And where my mind goes with someone that's sort of going through, hey, weeks before going distributed, I started this new gig. Could you sort of speak to how that experience has been and what it's like building relationships internally being in a distributed environment?
Yeah. Well, I will clarify and say that it wasn't a new career. I've been in the planning industry for several years now, but it was a new position. And I can totally resonate with what both Sumia and Sajad said. But at the same time, my industry as a city planner and an urban designer is so deeply rooted in understanding the communities that you're planning for, understanding how people experience their spaces, the problems, the issues, the concerns that the general city has or is facing. And so the challenge with starting a position that focuses so it's laser focused on housing right at the beginning of the pandemic. I started early February, so just over a month before the state of California, and I think most of the country started like officially working from home and quarantining, was incredibly difficult because you're immediately put in a position of we cannot communicate with the very people that we want to be planning for. And those very people are usually residents that don't have access to smartphones so that they can call or attend your Zoom calls or webinars or whatnot. They're often people that don't have laptops or don't have internet access as readily available as so much of the city. So in terms of those relations, it has been incredibly challenging. And I think architects and planners and just generally industries and disciplines that work closely with people are having to think very quickly on their feet in terms of how to make sure that we are being equitable and we are being inclusive of all kinds of people. When it comes to building relationships within the department, I think that I want to say it varies from personality to personality, but it also varies so greatly with the culture of any institution. This particular position is my first government sector job. I've always worked private sector. And I think there's something about a very massive HR department that exists in most private sector jobs, whereas in the public sector, it's not so much we'll plan events for you all to get to know each other, to feel like you're like a family. It's very much so you're in at this time, you're out at this time, you get your work done, and you do your job well. So I think that culture of public sector and also the pandemic has made it very challenging for me to really build those relationships. Leverage my identity and experience as a Muslim woman, as a Pakistani woman, as someone who is multilingual. And I think that those barriers that the pandemic has kind of put in all of us and all of our disciplines has made it a little bit more challenging to develop these authentic relationships.
Yeah, very well said. And I want to pick up right here on building relationships in a distributed world, because I think it's so important in the vocations that we're in. Speaking of technical difficulties, there was one in getting this show started. And so, we were 10 minutes late, and I just want to reel everyone back in because the intros were missed and the tee up to the program was missed. And so we may have to repeat a little bit, but I think it's in good faith and it's prudent for us to do that. So for everyone that's just joined, we have an amazing panel of Muslim women leaders here who were just talking about finding a new vocation amidst a pandemic. And, just to set the stage a bit, if you're just tuning in, this is the 4th episode of Inspire and Innovate, and our 2nd session for what we're calling Women Leaders Month. My name is Uzair Rashid, and I am serving as your moderator today for what has so far been a very thoughtful and insightful discussion and will continue to be so. I am an innovation leader right now at a large health insurance company where I'm hyper-focused on generating both incremental and around the bend innovations that are targeted towards delighting our consumers and our members. Prior to my current posts, I was leading and heading strategy and innovation at CVS Health with a focus on post-merger integrations, patient care transformation, and reimagining the delivery of care. You know, all that's to say, earlier this year, we have decamped to work from home, secondary to executive orders, and a looming upper respiratory illness that has challenged the world to sort of really think differently, to be agile and transform like never before. And for me personally, you know, this virus has sort of set the stage for deep cogitations around the implications of COVID and the downstream effects that we may have to play both sort of offense and defense against. And what we've learned so far is that unemployment rates have grown to 14.7% from 5.7% prior to COVID. What we've learned is that 1 in 6 Americans have lost their job secondary to the virus. And we've also learned that unemployment is disproportionately affecting immigrants and minority communities. And so in partnership with ISGH, we knew, you know, something has to be done. And that something is this Inspire and Innovate series, whose goal is to motivate and engage the communities we live in by providing no-cost webinars that facilitate bi-directional communication with influential Muslim leaders and enable other key resources in the process to inspire hope, to create resilience, and also to empower individuals to take charge of their future during these uncertain times. This month, as I mentioned, is Women Leaders Month for Inspire and Innovate, and it's incredibly exciting for me to be a part of that and to have such, you know, amazing folks on this panel. We'll start again, and I'm sorry to do a repeat, but we were offline of everyone that's on, and you know, they say second time's a charm. So again, we'll begin from the bottom right with Soumya.
Hey, assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Soumya. Just to tell you a bit about myself, I live right outside of New York City in Jersey City. I was mentioning earlier when we talked, I love Jersey City. So also excited to talk about that if anyone ever wants to talk about Jersey City. Career-wise, I graduated about 6 years ago. I studied public health and did work in political science, human rights, and social entrepreneurship. And then I ended up working at a startup accelerator, helping hundreds of early stage companies launch every year. After working there, I was very interested in digital health and corporate innovation, and I ended up working at a biotech company up in Boston for a few years, learning about how can I help them, similar to what Uzair said, look at their business functions and with the innovation lens. After that, I moved to New York and became a strategy consultant just so I can open my view past pharma and learn more about marketing, branding, and go-to-market. And since the pandemic has started, I actually have been helping volunteer, and I'm an incoming senior associate at Visible Hands, which is a pre-seed fund and accelerator, which will focus on helping women and minorities in launching tech businesses. So,
Thank you, Soumya. And Sadia.
Hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sadia Mukeet. I am the Director of Community Health at the Trust for Public Land. First of all, I want to thank Uzair for the invitation to participate, and just an honor to be part of this really impressive panel of women. I'm super excited to be here today. I work at the intersection of conservation, urban design, namely through parks and green space, as well as public health. My career has been an evolving one, to say the least, but one that has I've worked globally as well as domestically, in academia, in the private sector, as well as in now nonprofits. I have a bachelor's, master's, and a doctorate all in the space of public health. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sadia. And Wajiha.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I am Wajiha. I'm based in LA. I'm a city planner for the Department of City Planning in Los Angeles. I focus on housing. A lot of my work currently focuses on housing in the city of LA, but my range of work has included designing and planning housing settlements in cities like Kabul, Afghanistan, Cairo, Karachi. I've done a lot of domestic work as well, but I'll stick to the international stuff because it's obviously a lot more exciting. In LA, my housing related focus is around making sure housing is affordable, making sure it's equitable in terms of access, in terms of affordability. I also dabble in design here and there when it comes to thinking about housing in general for the city. Of course, things have changed drastically with COVID, and the industry of architecture and planning is in a space where we're reevaluating what that means for public spaces. Beyond architecture and city planning, I'm also the co-founder of Words in Urdu, which is a digital platform focused on the revival, the preservation, and the learning of the Urdu language.
Thank you, Wajiha. And Michelle.
So I'm going to try again. Can you hear me? Is it all good? Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Michelle Malik. I was born and raised in Islamabad, Pakistan. I came to the US to get my bachelor's, ended up getting a master's and a PhD in political science. Currently, I am an incoming assistant professor and a postdoc at Harvard University at the Department of Government. I specialize in ethnic and identity politics and what that means for voting, governance, and political accountability, with a special focus on Karachi, Pakistan, but I also work in other areas of the world. And I'm really happy to talk about what the academic route looks like for people, whether it's right for them or not, and what the possible promises and pitfalls are of this lifestyle.
Thank you, Michelle. And Mishu.
Assalamu alaikum again. Thank you again for spending your Saturday afternoon with all of us. My name is Mishu Tasnim. I'm the director of our Health and Human Services portfolio with the U.S. Digital Service. I have taken sort of a winding road into the healthcare space via technology. My background is in electrical engineering. I started off as a software engineer working at NASA, and I've always kind of meandered around the government space. So I've been at several agencies, including the IRS and most recently Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. My work primarily right now focuses on making sure that technologists have a seat at the table when folks are talking about policy and healthcare, because I don't think that one can live without the other. Technology exists to solve business needs, and when the requirements are thrown over someone's shoulder, we're going to build the wrong thing, right? Engineers are stereotypically known to not be able to communicate. So we just need a lot of lead time to know what it is that you want us to build. So happy to talk about that and how to navigate going from one career into a different domain that you don't have a background in. But thank you again for spending your time with us and including me on the panel.
Thank you, Mishu. And Tahura.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to Azair for putting on this really impactful series. My name is Tahura Samad. I'm a postdoc at MIT, which means I'm basically working on research that's at the intersection of biology, medicine, and nanotechnology. So my educational background is in bioengineering, and I'm sort of happy to talk about what that process sort of looks like, and I think what a sort of non-medicine career in the sciences can look like.
Thank you, Tahura. And Suja.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Suja. I am a new assistant professor of Arabic studies at the University of Miami, where I work in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures. I very recently defended my dissertation at Oxford University, and I work on exile and the environmental humanities in modern Arabic literature and Francophone Arab literature. I'm interested in also translating my work in the humanities into the social capacity. So how can literature and film and sort of artistic production inform our treatment of refugees and migrants in everyday life? So that's pretty much it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Suja. And I appreciate everyone sort of helping me retrofit the introductions back into the program. For, you know, to set up the stage back to where it was, we've gone through introductions. We spoke about, you know, starting a job amidst a pandemic. And then that led us to this really important, I think, discussion about building relationships in a distributed environment. You know, similar to you, and I see a lot of congruencies with Jiha with your current role and mine is, you know, I started a job February of last year, February 24th. And a few short weeks later, I was asked very politely to please go home. And so I did. And so I've been working remote since then. And, you know, I'd love to open up the floor and sort of talk about building relationships in a distributed environment, be it the technology, the people, the process. And, you know, Mishu, I know you had a lot of thoughts on this space, so maybe we kick it off with you.
Sure. Building relationships in this environment has been difficult. We've had quite a few team members join my team over the course of the last several months, and it has been really difficult. I think the one place that I would really lean heavily on is encouraging others, whether you are the new team member or you have other team members joining, is encouraging like people getting coffee chats. Because so much of the work that I do is based on relationships. I would spend like most of my lunch hour or any breaks in between just kind of wandering the hallways, getting to know not only like the individuals that I needed to get in touch with, but also like the staff that manages their calendars, because those are like key people to get to know and be friends with. And you miss out on all of that. So what I've been doing is being very mindful of that and making sure that I'm connecting people, not just for strategic reasons to have coffee with each other, but also just to get to know each other as human beings, even if their work is unrelated. So no matter where you are in your career, I would really encourage those like water cooler sessions or coffee chat sessions, what have you, with folks at like, you know, convenient times.
So the coffee banter continues. And Mishu, just from like a pragmatic sort of tangible perspective, is that something like you're throwing 5 minutes on someone's calendar? Is it a soft ping on Teams or something? Like, how do you go about getting that coffee banter initiated?
It depends on the other person. Not everyone uses the same technologies. I work in the government. So like, you know, some people use Slack, other people refuse to sign on. It's so I just have to know where my recipient is, whether they're more receptive to email or whatnot. And really depending on like the recipient, I will cater it accordingly. But usually it's like 30 minutes and like no agenda. I am there just to listen, you know, asking about how their weekend was, how hard it's been taking care of loved ones during the pandemic, just no agenda. And then all of a sudden you start hearing more and more about like what their work problems are, right? And like, that's really where I'm trying to get to at the end of the day is like, what are your problems? And like, how do we be friends? When you have a problem, am I top of mind for you to pick up the phone and call? And so that's gone a long way to just kind of go in with no agenda and genuinely no agenda, you know, like not have a hidden agenda later on.
It's really interesting to hear that. It's like, you know, prior to going distributed, one of the things we probably took for granted most were those intangibles related to our in-person interactions. And I love your approach in sort of keeping it very informal and laid back to open up the floor and people to really build trust and interdependency. You know, does anyone else have strong opinions here or any advice you might want to throw out?
I think just to double click on the listening aspect of what Misu, there is sort of this, I guess, habit or practice we sort of had in the office in the morning where everybody sort of picked up their coffee or gather around the water cooler. But that there are ways to, before you even begin the day, just saying hello on Slack to folks very casually and continuing that conversation over the course of the day has just been a really great way to informalize some of our communication, some of our interaction. And I work in an institution that has 27 offices across the country, including Hawaii, and so working sort of East Coast to West Coast is and beyond has just been an approach that we really have to be open to that communication via a couple of different methods.
Yeah, that's great. And it almost sounds like over communicating, setting communication norms, using different modalities of communication, whether it's Zoom, Teams, Slack, phone calls. And I think that's really, really important. Wajaha, it sounds like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I also think, and this is something that I'm still working on, having almost been working from home for a year, like many of us, I'm assuming, is also redefining redefining how we build relationships. So we're all in a very unique, well, whoever's working from home is in a very unique position where we have insight into very personal spaces. And for example, I'm looking at Sadia, and if we were in a work meeting, I would see maybe the Ayatul Kursi you have in the back wall, or maybe looking at Mishu, there's plants there. And there's so much insight into who that person is that we don't get to see in the 27 offices that we have in the department. Speaking for the Department of City Planning, it's something that's, the department office itself is something that I would pull from a 90s sitcom, brown carpet, cubicles. There's very little insight that we get into the people that we're working so closely with. And I remember the first several months, if my husband was at home or if there was any noise in the kitchen, I would be very conscious about it and very cautious to make sure it was very silent in the home. And over time, I've gotten to meet a lot of my colleagues' children that are running around, or, their Alexa is going off for an alarm that they were, I don't know, baking something. And I just think that those walls are starting to come down, and there's something really beautiful about that, because in the workspace, we don't always bring our personal identities into the workplace. And being virtual, being on Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts, we do get this very unique, very personal insight that, again, I'm still trying to leverage and be more and more comfortable with sharing. But it's also an interesting thing to.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I've never actually thought about, wow, I'm getting some, insider access to folks. Like, you learn a lot from people, and it helps sort of get to know them a bit. And it sounds like some forms of relationship building have accelerated being distributed as well. And one thing that stuck out, Ujia, was you mentioned that initially you were worried about background noise, and sort of you let your guard down a bit and have become more comfortable. And I remember when we first kicked off into being distributed, Zoom immediately became a verb. And it was like, okay, this is interesting. And then after that, it was like, if somebody's 2 minutes late to a meeting and meetings are back to back, you automatically assumed they must have, power because they're not here and the meeting started 2 minutes ago, which in person, sometimes people go to a restroom before walking into a meeting place. And I think all that's to say is it's helped us build, I hope, empathy for one another, because I think that's a key aspect of all of this and sort of the new normal. Outside of being distributed, one of the things that has really resonated with all of the panelists here is career trajectory. Like folks starting in a specific area or domain expertise, and then building skill sets and competencies that are either left or right. or, completely vertical growth as well. I'd love to open up the floor here, and anybody can chime in and speak about, where did you start? How did you get to where you are? And what were the hurdles you faced or those side steps and pivots you encountered throughout your career so far? And what advice might you leave or impart the audience with?
I can go ahead and get started if that's helpful, folks. So there are a couple of questions in there. In terms of where I started, a lot of my exposure to the field of public health came through first the academic setting in college, and then really the practical application of it, which was in the internships, in the experiences of participating in research. And so it really was the practice of public health that really launched that career and that sort of process of asking questions that informed my next position throughout over a decade-long career. So I would encourage those of you who are at that sort of early stage, or even if those of you who might be at that sort of transition time in your career, to ask the right questions that intrigue you, that pull out your curiosity. And then also sort of approach it from the perspective of practice. Obviously, this, for Michelle and Suja, it might be quite different, and Tahora might be quite different in terms of the academic field. But it was really the practical experiences, the internships, the externships, the jobs that pushed my career forward in a very interesting and unique way.
I can kind of piggyback off of that one. From the educational side of things, I think. So just speaking from my personal experience, I actually went to undergrad at a very small university in my local hometown, 15 minutes away from my parents' house. And it wasn't a fancy name or anything like that, but there I encountered people who were willing to invest in me as a student and took on the mentorship role. And from there, I went to UNC for my master's, and from there, I went to Oxford for my PhD. So sometimes it's not even about the starting point. My father always told me it doesn't really matter where you go to undergrad, it matters what you do, where you go, the place you go. And I think there's something to be said about being proud about humble beginning and kind of taking something that at face value might not seem prestigious, or that it might not really get you to the place that you're dreaming about, but it really just, sometimes you just need a certain number of intersections to work in your favor in order for you to sort of, jump to the next thing. And from that perspective, also, I can say that my career also very much started out in the same way. So by some twist of fate, my first real academic position ended up being at that same university I went to undergrad in, UNC Greensboro. And everyone was telling me literally 3 years ago, the state of the humanities is such a mess, you probably won't get a job. And I got this small position, 1-year contract that led to a 2-year contract at UVA, which led to a tenure track position at UMiami. So it's like, just believe that you start out somewhere for a reason, right? And you might not understand at the time that you're going through something, why you're going through it, but it's your responsibility to sort of make the connections from where you're standing and hopefully move to the next place.
I want to add to that, the taking time to reflect of where you are and where that's going to take you next. I went from being a software engineer to trying out project management, knowing full well that I knew 0 things about project management. I was unbelievably shy, and I hated speaking, I hated attention, I still do, but I was like, you know what, it's a startup, it's a small company, if I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna fail around 10 people as opposed to failing in a company of 30,000 employees, right? No one will notice. That's false, because when you fail in front of 10 people, all 10 people notice. But it was a good place for me to try it out. It was definitely not the best environment, right? I had to learn a lot based off of what not to do and like examples to not replicate. But I think that is also a key lesson to learn. And I don't think I would have gotten into healthcare had I stayed in the engineering like place that I was in. I loved my job at NASA and like there was no reason for leaving. It was great. They were paying for grad school, but I still was like, you know what? I don't have soft skills. I don't know how to speak. I don't know how to communicate like verbally or like written. It was just a way for me to push myself and like, I don't know, I just learn a lot better when I'm doing something as opposed to like learning it in an academic environment. And so like I stayed there for 5 years and like learned all I could learn out of them. It was at times very, very toxic, but I was like, you know what, I'm still learning so much about like marketing, about communications, how to write proposals, right? Like all areas that in a large company I wouldn't have gotten exposure to because you're so pigeonholed in your role and your title. But in a company of like 10, 15 people and like watching it grow from like 15 people to 150 people when I left and going through all of those growing pains and like never being shy about picking up grunt work, right? Like there's awful jobs, right? You're going to have to sit there in the middle of the night on a weekend and like fix margins and align fonts and Word will hate you. But like you learn so much patience and resilience from doing like those crappy jobs that like when you do become a manager and you're in a leadership position yourself, you have so much empathy for people like that you're like, we're not going to do it this way. We're going to automate this because like, I don't want you to be here on a Saturday night. So I think it just makes you a better leader down the road as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, I always looked at project management as like the dark side. And because it is really arduous, you're chasing people down, gathering requirements and driving execution. But it sounds like what I netted out from that, Mishu, is, you know, every position you're in and circumstance you're in, you took it like paid training. Like I'm here to learn and I'm going to pick up everything like a sponge. So I'm ready for the next move. So Mia, you know, your background resonates with the last sentence I just said. You seem to be pivoting and moving around a bit as well.
Yeah, I could tell you a bit more about that. Actually, the way that I have viewed my career and any steps I've taken is very much like, I would describe it as avoiding paying for school. My first job, like I knew nothing about startups, nothing about business. Some guy had messaged me on LinkedIn, here at Mass Challenge, we're accelerating 128 companies. And I was like, half those words, I don't even know what they are, but you know, this sounds cool. I'll learn about it. So I literally took that jump. It was a calculated risk because I knew that the companies that they were helping were focused on impact and making a difference. And some of them have gone on to do great things in the US and beyond. So, you know, I thought I'm out of school. Alhamdulillah, I have no debt. Let me just try this. And after 2 years, what I had found was I learned so much about business development and project management and relationship management. But around me, everyone was saying the same thing. We're building the plane while we're flying it. And as someone who had never formally studied business, I was like, how can I learn what it's like to be on a flight without paying for school? And so I got very lucky that one of the companies where I was managing relationships was at a 3-year-old company, 2,500 people. I worked with them for about a year and a half. They said, hey, come work with us. You'll learn a lot about different business functions. And I thought, wonderful. Like I am going to take this and learn as much as I can about HR, marketing, IT, data science. And also at the end of it, the fantastic thing was I was viewing this as like a janky MBA where I'm like, okay, so like I'm in pharma. One thing I am interested in, but I can't do here is marketing in a traditional sense or branding, because that's like the one class I haven't taken. And so that's why when I was looking for strategy consulting, I looked for something where it was kind of like a triple Venn diagram sense of what am I good at? what do I like to do and where can I make an impact? And because I knew I had done innovation consulting, I knew I could make an impact by bringing different background, because I had worked with so many different startups and different industries. And then what did I really want out of it? I was able to go in and say, I'm going to do this for a year because this is how I'm going to learn if I like this or not. And then based on that, I had learned that the thing that I liked the most was helping people launch new ideas and companies. And so when the opportunity came up to help other people, especially people of color and minorities, launch businesses, I actually started volunteering my very little night and weekends just as a volunteer with this fund and accelerator. So key terms to remember from that is janky MBA. And yeah, I think so.
So Mia, your janky MBA is going to look really nice next to my honorary master's from the School of the Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
What's really interesting about this is we're talking about domain and we're talking about skill sets, right? You always hear people say, hey, AI is agnostic to domain. You can apply it to healthcare, you can apply it to the financial industry. And, it sounds like you've done a bit of the same, Samia. You built skill sets and you started applying it to domains that really interested you from an impact perspective. And, Mishu, I hate to poke at you again, but it sounds like you have a lot of experience here as well in taking your skills and bringing them over to healthcare. And then I'd love to open it up the floor after Mishu to everyone else that might shed some light and color on the topic of domain versus skill.
Yeah, I think one thing I realized while I was making that transition from engineering to project management is how little people actually know about the technology that they are buying, building, or selling, right? And it's like going to somebody with a blender and saying, hey, here's a vacuum cleaner I'm trying to sell you. And nobody in that transaction knows that this blender is actually a vacuum cleaner, right? And how much it's actually supposed to be worth. And that's what I started to see in the technology space is like, people were selling vaporware, people were buying vaporware, and then like the victims were the software developers who were like, what are we even building? Like this is like a non-existent thing. It's impossible to build. And then like realizing that there was that like intersection that like, and then like trying to like bang my head against the wall. I think the IRS was like definitely a difficult place to be because like so much of that was happening there. That like it was almost like mind-boggling that they are in charge of like the entire nation's like tax and revenue services. And so like I learned so much in like how to hire, how to sell, how to market, like in the work there. And then where I got into like the domain side of things was, I think just like, I mean, I don't know, I come from like, a South Asian background. You're told you have to be a doctor. You're female, you're going to grow up and you're going to be a doctor. Sorry, mom, I know you're listening. And I didn't become a doctor, right? I took biology and I was like, nope, not for me. But like just seeing the impact of technology in the healthcare space and then pushing on the people that I work with to say, like, you have to get me out of the IRS. Like, I want to be in healthcare. How do you get me into healthcare? I was fortunate enough, again, to work in a small company, fortunate or unfortunate, and then also fortunate enough to have friends like Sadia who are in public health, right? And like looking at job descriptions and like she's been there like and listened to all of my ranting about how I like want to get into this space. But you look up these job descriptions and they all require you to have either an MD or a public health degree, right? And I didn't want to go into more debt and like pay off more student loans. So I was like, okay, I have to find a way to pivot. And then realizing like I have skills, I have technical skills. I also know about procurement, I know about contracting, and I know how to hire and build teams. So how do I like, move at a 90-degree angle and make that right turn into healthcare? So once like the business development opportunity kind of came up to try to get into the healthcare space via project management, right? I was like, you know what, I will take domain first, right? Like I know that like domain and skills are not always going to align, but like I have the skills. Next step will be domain, get into healthcare. So although the environment was a difficult environment, like to be in, it was not an easy company. And I was like ready to leave. I was like, I need to get into healthcare. This is my chance to get in, because the next place I go to, I'll already have that healthcare experience, as opposed to if I leave now with the skills I have, no one's going to let me into healthcare, which continues to be a struggle, right? Every time I'm the new person in the room, people are like, who's this engineer? Why do we let her in? Like, she's annoying. She keeps telling us to use Slack and Google Docs. We don't want to. We want to use a Word document. She won't read anything, so it's like constant struggle. But I think like it also builds you up, like personally, right? To be able to say like, nope, I need to be in this room and here's why.
The age-old dilemma of SharePoint versus Google Docs. Let's not even get into it. So what I'm picking up here, Mishu, is really, really interesting. Is you walked into a domain that you were really, really interested in a career specifically, well, into a job that you really weren't extremely passionate about. But you said PM is my move into healthcare. And I think that, first of all, I want to highlight that point to the audience, because it's really important when you're looking to step to the left or to the right, that sometimes you have to actually step back as well. And take that with grace, because you're going to learn a heck of a lot in very short order. The second thing you said, Mishu, which really struck a chord within me that resonated fairly loudly, is you leaned on your friend who's also on this panel, called Sadia. And she helped you navigate this land of healthcare, which you had almost like a myopic lens into. And that's incredibly important as well, because some folks, be it pride, be it I don't want to bother anyone else, they might not tap on the shoulder of a Sadia. And I think I want to underscore, overemphasize, highlight with a yellow highlighter, like lean on your network. And there's no shame in it. It's actually a great thing to do. And then the final piece that I thought was really, really interesting was you have a technical background, and you were able to apply that to the industry of healthcare. And I've noticed that there's sort of this new intersection in business that meets at tech, that meets at innovation, and that meets at strategy. And so can folks sort of talk about applying skills that you've built to a new domain? Like, how do you start marketing yourself appropriately to an area that you haven't lived in before?
I can kick it off there if that's helpful again. So I have been, I think since I was 17 years old, in some form or another in the space of what I consider traditional public health, whether at the city health department or the Centers for Disease Control or more grassroots with Peace Corps, right? And I am now in the world of conservation, which is a whole different field. And it's really the perspective where they're looking at me as a subject matter expert, bringing insight and skills into this space. The big thing in this transition for me was recognizing that I am still within public health. It's just taken on a new form. And secondly, that it's really about being able to communicate ideas. And I did not, because this is sort of something that I had to recognize that came naturally to me, was something that I did not see as a skill. And communication, even though we sort of culturally, I think, often rely on some of our harder skills, that communication is a skill, whether it's through the arts, through educating students, or connecting government with engineers. I mean, government, like sort of policymakers with engineers. Everybody on here is doing work at the intersection, and that's really an intersection of their fields, but that's really fundamentally around this concept of communication. And that is a muscle that I think as early as you can, I would highly encourage folks to start really flexing, start really working on, and do so in a number of different perspectives, whether it's through the written form. As a high school student, I used to think that I couldn't write. It took me being around a number of engineers and a number of other sort of like areas of folks being like, hey, I'm actually can argue, a specific point forward. Yes, exactly. And so I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of understanding, being aware of your own skill set that you don't sort of think of as a skill set. I'll stop there.
No, it's really well said. Wajaha, were you about to speak as well?
Yeah, Wajiha.
Wajiha,
So yeah, I was snapping in my head as Sadia, you were talking, because this idea of only identifying our hard skills as our skills when we put together a resume or during interviews, sometimes also not sometimes, I think that in essence is not valuing all that we can contribute to a workspace and environment. Our own experiences and our perspective is a skill set. So I'll just speak to my own experience coming to urban planning. My background is in engineering from the University of Michigan, and I went on an international trip as an undergrad student, which led me to really fall in love with this idea of cities and spaces. And that's when I knew, I was like, there's no way that I can pivot into a career in architecture and city planning with an engineering background, unless I do something that's like civil engineering or something of that sort, which isn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to focus on the people and the design, and that was the area that I was interested in. And I realized I can't pivot there until I go back to school and really study this discipline. And so this concept of skill sets, when I was in undergrad as an engineer, I was doing a lot of photography. I would photograph for our college campus magazine. It was like an online magazine, and that was one thing that I did. And just that simple skill set that I polished for 4 years and then years onwards is something that I've applied into my work as a city planner, and how we can think about space, how we can spatialize places, how we can map cities using photography. And it's never something that I would have put together. It's never something that I set the intent of, I'm doing these photo shoots as an undergrad engineer with the intention of taking it to place XYZ. It was solely something I was doing for fun. And so I also want to reiterate that as we talk about careers, as we talk about professional development, and as we have these conversations, we usually lean on the sides of developing these hard skills, writing skills, technical skills, et cetera, et cetera. And life skills are just as valuable and are so often dismissed from these conversations. How to communicate, how to build relationships, how to paint, how to take pictures, how to cook, how to do these tactical things are skills that we still need to be polishing and working on in this capitalist world that we live in, that very quickly and very easily dismisses these things. And my example of photography and planning is just one of those things. And I also wanted to add, in the earlier conversation that we were having about trajectories, one thing that I see in a lot of, one thing that I see in a lot of Instagram posts is these motivational Instagram posts is find your purpose. And I think about that and I combat it in my head by thinking you can never know your purpose until you're living this fulfilled life where you're exploring. You will never know what your purpose is if you're limiting yourself to specific careers that our society and community celebrates and respects. But even beyond that, if you're limiting yourself to your comfort zone. And so what I was saying earlier about that one international trip that I took as an undergrad student, that I was fortunate enough to get funded by my university is something that led me to experience something that I probably couldn't have sitting in, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I'm not saying it has to be an international awakening of any sort, but that was me stepping out of my comfort zone. That was me traveling abroad without the, protection and support of my parents. And yeah, I feel like I'm ranting, but I think those things are really important. And that whole concept of skill sets needs to not lean so heavy in the hard skills, like value the things that you contribute. And also just step out of your comfort zone and do the things that can really bring you to your purpose, whatever that means.
Wajida, it's very well said, and there's so many gems in there that we can pick up and learn from. Oftentimes discomfort, oftentimes friction, oftentimes being uncomfortable is a very transformative moment in your life if you allow it to be. This pandemic and recession is a testament to that, if nothing else. It's forced industries, it's forced people to be agile and to transform in a way that they never have before, right? Like there's this digital transformation that's going on throughout industries, and some people say, it's not the CEO of the organizations leading it, it's not even the chief digital officer leading it, it's COVID leading the digital transformation. So I really value that. And I also picked up on the jack of all trades sort of thing you laid out, and, value your skill sets, whether it's photography or something that isn't traditionally looked at as a skill, because it is a skill, and curate a story around it even. I mean, there's a lot of ways to, I think, market yourself in preparing to make a pivot, right? Like you can be a technical resource and say, hey, I code Python, I'm a developer, a full stack developer, and I know Java and I know CSS. Or you can say, I take business requirements and I distill them into technical outcomes that delight consumers and are wildly successful. So, right, it's like just framing it differently, but it is actually the same thing. And so we've been talking about a lot of industries today, and I wanted to we have 3 academics online here that have been sitting sort of silently, and I really want to poke at Michelle, Tahura, and Suja for a moment. And what about the academic route, right? There are folks that are tuned in that are really keen on pursuing academia as a career. And, it's not something I think about often, but I'm really curious to learn more about. So whoever wants to kick it off, take the mic and go for it.
So can I first just say so much yes to what Vajiha was talking about with regards to the comfort zone stuff. I mean, I feel like, as she was talking, I was thinking about my own career trajectory and how much of that has relied on getting out of my comfort zone. So, when I first came from Pakistan to America, I was terrified. I mean, I did not want to be here. I wanted to go to the same school, LUMS, that all my friends were going to in Pakistan. And my mom was like, no way, you got a scholarship. You can't say no to a scholarship. You have to leave. And I'm so grateful to her for that. I think if it was up to my dad, I would have stayed in Pakistan. But she was just she's a very strong woman, and she was very particular that you have to go. And then when I got there, it was really hard. I was the only Pakistani for all 4 years. It's a small liberal arts school in the middle of nowhere. I was like one of 4 Muslims. Ramadan was so hard because they closed the dining halls before you broke the fast, and they had all these rules about how you couldn't take food out and nothing was open past 7. I mean, there was all this like really hard stuff. But it was also a place that allowed me to take classes that I wouldn't be able to take in Pakistan and get mentors that I would never have found in Pakistan. And to the point that others brought up of just exploring a bunch of different things. So I couldn't make up my mind about what I wanted to do. So I had 2 majors and a minor. I took more classes than anybody else because I was like, I just want to figure out what I want to do. And I got out of my comfort zone by taking philosophy as one of my majors, which my South Asian parents were very, very upset about. They were like, you need something more practical. It should be like math or something like that. And I was like, well, I have economics and that should count and that should make you happy. So I think getting out of the comfort zone, and even with my PhD, like when I had to pick my dissertation topic, I decided I wanted to study Karachi, and my parents were like, no, because, I was this like girl from Islamabad, Pakistan. Like I wanted to go to Karachi and study violence and ethnic politics and talk to a bunch of like scary men, apparently. And eventually I had to just sort of say like, I'm old enough and this is kind of my job. And I know that you love me and you care about me, but I'm kind of going to do my job the way I want to do my job. And so, yeah, and it was scary. It wasn't easy at all. But I think it's really gotten me to where I am today. Alhamdulillah.
So Michelle, it sounds like you had an advocate in mom. It sounds like dad eventually came on board as he saw your successes grow from undergrad to Stanford and now at Harvard. I guess, can you, and Soja and Tahura, maybe specifically talk about now, you found that discomfort that led you to double down on your passions, but what about academia, right? Like you just got into a tenure track at Harvard. Suja, you're in a non-tenure track at the University of Miami. Tahura, you're doing a postdoc at MIT. Like, how can somebody really prepare to get into this academic world? And then B, like, has it changed during COVID? Like, is it more difficult? Is it easier now? Is it less spots or vacancies? I don't even know if I'm asking the right question. I hope I am, but whoever wants to chime in, go for it.
Okay, I also want to clarify. My dad wasn't not supportive of me. I would be like, he's the one who's been calling me professor since I was like 9, because he knew that I loved reading and writing, and like he's always believed in me. He just missed me too much. Like I was gone all the time, so he didn't like that. But does anybody else want to start on the academic route? I mean, for me, it was just very much. It was what I loved doing. I loved reading and I loved writing, and I took a bunch of majors to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I really wanted to get a PhD in philosophy because it was what I loved the most. But I decided for personal reasons and because it didn't seem practical, because the humanities, as Suja mentioned, like I knew even as an undergrad, I knew that there were no jobs for the most part in philosophy. And then I decided on political science because of just a weird thing happened. Like my dad was almost killed in a suicide bombing, and it was like huge in our family, obviously, and sort of was very difficult for us emotionally. And the way I reacted to that was I just wanted to learn more about political violence and why people use violence for political ends. And that's kind of why I got into what I do. But I guess just to summarize, because this was kind of a rant, I think for me, I found the academic route by combining what I like to do with my time, which was reading and writing and having conversations and asking questions and being curious, with something that I found a lot of meaning in for personal reasons, right? What happened to my dad. And that's kind of how I got into it.
How about Tahura? What are your thoughts on being a postdoc?
I love, what are my thoughts on my postdoc? It's great. I think that last point Michelle made is really a good one, which is, it kind of captures how I got into sort of the academic side of engineering, which was thinking about what I love to do with my time. And so for me, going into college, I loved biology. I was really excited about it, but I was also a very creative person. And so I didn't actually really enjoy like spending a lot of time reading about biology, but I would always be like, oh, that's an interesting biological thing. How can I use it to do something else? And so going into academics, sort of engineering, that field, engineering research in the sort of biomedical sciences was like a really natural transition for me. And I think in terms of trajectory and path, I think a lot of people have talked about things that are so important today. Like I think Suja mentioned sort of finding opportunity wherever you are, even small institution, big institution, there's always opportunity and sort of making the most of it. And then Mishu and Wuji had talked a little bit about like being brave and just seizing opportunity when you find it, wherever you find it. The point I sort of want to add that was really important for my career trajectory was mentorship. And so I think because of my personality type and also in my field, it's really typical to sort of get training for more senior scientists. And so I think how I've always gone forward is just to see who's in the place that I want to be and to just sort of latch onto them. Like, so as an undergrad in bioengineering, I was sort of pursuing that in the typical way with coursework, but then I got into research and so worked in a lab in my free time. And so what that sort of involves, I think, is just cold emailing a bunch of professors and having them ignore you for like months and months. And at some point, you just sort of get used to it, right? You're like, I'm just going to send off like 10 emails and everyone's going to ignore me, but I'm just going to keep trying. And I think sort of having that as your sort of baseline of just like, I'm going to be brave and try. And the worst they can do is ignore me and like, whatever, I'm like used to it. And so like, that's sort of been my entire trajectory. I got into a lab I was really excited about, and I saw that there were grad students there, and that like the path to becoming a professor involved first going to grad school, getting a PhD. So I latched onto a grad student and I learned a ton from him and I applied to grad school. And then in I think another important part of my path was also sort of experiencing research at different institutions. And so especially for me, like I think I didn't really know too many Muslim women who were grad students. And so I was able to sort of, I think if you're interested in research and that career path, there are a lot of like summer programs run by the NSF, sort of internships where you can go to other institutions and learn. And that's actually how I got to MIT. I did a sort of summer at MIT and I just fell in love. I found a professor I really liked, and that's the lab I ended up doing my PhD in. And so, as I said, this sort of story of just sort of finding opportunities and being brave and having that lead you from one step to the next is really, really my story. I think in terms of transitioning from my PhD to my postdoc, I want to share this story because I think it sort of gets at what this panel has been talking about a little bit, which is my PhD ended up being sort of, even though I'm an engineer by training, sort of in this field called biophysics. It's like what it sounds like, biology and physics. But it was very much more on the basic science side, and I knew I wanted to pivot back towards application. I really was that person, like, I want to make the next generation of therapeutics and drugs that are going to help people. But I'm sort of in this physics world. Like, how do I make that change in direction? And so I think a lot of the strategies people have talked about today are exactly what you need. It's sort of selling yourself. I think the thing that I did was I used my, like, the fact that I was pivoting as my strength. And I said, I come from this place and I have this perspective that's very different. I think this can help you. I think this can be your asset. And actually, at first people were like, no, I don't agree. Like, even though I had like a PhD from MIT, some places were like, no, we're actually not interested. And then I would just follow up. The offer I'm at right now, actually, I reached out to them and I said, hey, like you're working on cancer diagnostics and therapeutics. My background's in biophysics and antimicrobials, and I think I could use your technology to move in that direction. And they were like, yeah, we agree, but we're actually not hiring right now. And so I waited 2 months, and then I said, listen, like, but actually what they said was, we're really interested in moving that direction. And so I just like waited, and I was like, my whole life has been people saying no and me just being like, are you sure? And so I just emailed them back and I said, you know, if you're moving in this direction, I think I could really be an asset. So I just wanted to follow up. And they actually got back to me and said, we got funding a couple of days ago. We're going to hire you. So I think, like, more so than telling you about like going to college at Berkeley or going to MIT for a PhD, I think like maybe hopefully these stories are sort of helpful to think about.
That's really well said, Tahura. It's almost like hurry up and wait grew your persistence and perseverance, and that led to the offer in the end. I love that. And I'm so sorry, Michelle, I cut you off.
No, I should have. I just wanted to say one thing. So that's amazing, Tahura. And there's all this data out there that basically shows that, you know, when a job is advertised, the women will really look at like what are the, you know, the qualifications required thing. And if they don't meet one of the qualifications, they won't apply, and men will do it anyway. And one of the things that I think I've learned over time is like, if just go for it. Like, it doesn't, this job at Harvard as well, like I wasn't going to go on the job market. I was early, and then the job ad came out and I felt like I could be a good fit. And I submitted the applications at 5 a.m. in the morning, 5 hours late. You know, my advisor was like, I don't really know what you're doing, but okay. And somehow it worked out. And if I hadn't just applied, and there were lots of voices that were saying, well, maybe you should wait another year, maybe you're not ready yet, stuff like that. Not all of them, but some of them certainly, because you're told as an academic to go on the market all at the same time, not to do just one place. And I just applied to one place and ended up, alhamdulillah, getting that job. And I think, yeah, just keep asking and don't think you're not qualified. Like, you might be qualified. Who's to say?
Yeah, I love that. Apply even if you're a bit fashionably late.
One thing I want to add there is, you know, of course, there has been a ton of research saying that women are less likely to apply if they don't see themselves check every one of those boxes. Like, if you're already self-selecting out, like, you're not giving yourself that opportunity because you're afraid of rejection. And like, part of life is being able to learn and like roll with the punches. And I mean, another different way to view it is like, for people who are looking to apply to jobs now, if you meet 10 out of 10 requirements, you will be bored. Wait 6 months, you will be bored because you've already done it all. And then unless there is like a clear path for development and growth, it doesn't really make sense if you are leaving and joining for growth.
Yeah, very well said. Suja, it looked like you were about to chime in as well from an academic perspective.
Say, from the humanities perspective, I think especially within the Muslim community, broadly speaking, we do tend to place value on career paths that are, you know, safer bets. Like, you know, just make sure you do something that you know there's a job at the end. That was never the case for me. And so I think that I'm a very passionate advocate for people doing what they love to do, even if there's a million doors shut in your face. And I knew from the beginning, I come from a Palestinian background, you know, I saw my family really struggling under occupation, and it was so important to me to do something that was socially committed because I spent my summers in hell on earth, basically. So for me, that was sort of the impetus behind making sure that I did something to the best of my abilities. And I sort of had this moment in my early 20s where I was like, you know, law school seems like the most logical choice for somebody with my background who wants to do something that is kind of explosive in the sense of, I just want to reach as many people as possible. And similar to Wajiha, actually in undergrad, I studied abroad and I met a lot of people. And some of them were lawyers, and they told me, you know, I think you're honestly just too passionate for law. Law is not for people who really want to change the world in the way that you're speaking about. And so I kind of thought to myself, you know, what is something else that I really love? Languages, literature, film, the arts. And I found myself always drawn to those classes anyway, but I think I sort of lied to myself in the beginning, thinking that, you know, you can't make a career out of that. So I would say for me, a lot of serendipitous factors kind of came to the fore, and I decided to go for it. And I was just convinced that, like, if I did my best, something would come through. But, you know, obviously I got, you know, it's so weird when looking back on it now. I remember just 7 years ago, a professor told me, well, if you want to be a professor in the humanities, you have to go Harvard or go home. Like, there's no point, you know, if you don't get a top 10 degree. And I was like, okay, I'll try. So I applied to all of these schools and ended up going to England and doing my PhD there, obviously. But even there, even going to Oxford, my supervisor 3 years ago said, you know, Suja, I'm sorry, but the state of the humanities is so dismal that you should start thinking about potentially looking into another field, because just everything says that it's not going to work out for you. And I was like, no, I didn't come this far to hear that. So like I said, I wasn't afraid to start in an adjunct position that paid me $20,000 a year. And I'm very lucky that my parents always gave me wings as opposed to clipping them. And so they supported me while I built that resume, because I kind of wanted to find the way of like coming back into the American Academy. Like I said, that led to UVA. But at UVA, there was also the challenge of people telling me, looking at your CV, your publications are very interesting. You publish short story translations from Arabic to English. That's not going to get you a tenure track position. Like, you need to start publishing in journals. And I was like, look, I have only so much bandwidth right now. I'm going to really just follow my gut with this one and focus on the teaching and publish these non-conventional things because they make me happy in the end. And so I was like, it's already going to be a difficult path anyway. I'm just going to do the things that revive me, the things I'm passionate about. And UVA led to a tenure track position at Miami, which I'm pretty sure over 200 or 300 people applied for this job. And that, I think there's something to be said. I think the universal kind of message that we're encouraging young Muslims, and especially young Muslim women, is take up space. Don't be ashamed of your voice. Like, use it. Say, hey, I'm here. I want to learn. This is what I need. This is what I want. Demand kind of like the things that you need to feel fulfilled, and ask people for help. And if somebody's telling you, look, like, you're not going to put bread on the table translating short stories of Palestinian writers into English, just be like, I'm just doing it because it's important to me to give back to my community and follow that as well. And so there's so many reasons why, if I look at the trajectory of what I've been through over 10 years, there's nothing that would have told me when I applied to Oxford I'd get in. There's nothing that told me that an adjunct position in 2017 was going to lead to a tenure track position in 2020. Everything, the odds were always against me, but I think, like we've all been saying, you have to knock on every opportunity's door, and you have to believe in yourself, and you also have to believe that certain things are meant for you. So it's a combination of faith and hustle and community. Like, no one's self-made too at the end of the day. So mentorship is really important, and once you make it, pay it forward. So it's like a cycle. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, that's really well said, Sojourner. I sort of brings the notion of shoot for the stars, and at worst you'll land on the clouds. And that's really resonated with me. And if I take something from what you said, there's so much good there. What really stuck out to me that might really translate well to this pandemic and people going through being furloughed or joblessness and really trying to find the next thing is, it's a great opportunity to hit pause, take a deep breath, take it as an opportunity to really figure out your passion, to really figure out what drives you, how you can be mission driven, and lean on your network and your community. We're all here to do just that. And as we wrap up today, another thing that will happen is, everyone on this panel will open up for mentorship, which is such an amazing time commitment and an amazing offer to the community. And so reach out to folks and those that you don't, and get mentorship. Mishu, it sounded like you were about to chime in as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on Soja's point about listening to feedback. I think feedback is very key, and it definitely helps you grow. But I think also just keep in mind that you are also getting feedback from human beings that also have their own internal motives for saying one thing or the other, right? Every single year in undergrad, I was told to not be an engineer and to not pursue engineering because my grades were never high enough, right? But in the back of my mind, I was like, I know my grades are not high enough, but I'm also used to getting straight A's up until I got to undergrad, right? So there is a disconnect here, and I will not let you talk me out of this, right? I will push through this regardless of how terrible my transcript is. And same thing at work, right? I was definitely one of those people that got my validation externally. I got it from grades, I got it from appreciation, promotions, titles, right? It wasn't until I was able to just be like, you know what, I'm just going to quit my job, and I need to prove this to myself that I can get a job on my own without connections, without obviously connections are helpful, but just without having a fallback plan. And I think that is so important to realize it in your own way. I don't encourage everybody being unemployed because that is risky, but find your own way to measure how much validation and feedback you need externally, and how much and reflect on it on your own. Don't just take someone else's word for your worth.
Yeah, it's really well said. I think intention is important, but perception is also reality. And coming from a consulting background, a lot of time consultants are gluttons for pain in that we love real-time feedback, and there's always a diversity of perspective. And my thought is get as much feedback as you can, but put it through a filter and distill it into and net it out to like what are they really trying to say and how can I become better from it, because continuous and constant improvement is just a synonym for life.
Can I just say one thing, please? I just forgot a really important point, especially with this new generation. I think social media and all of the ways that we're overstimulated kind of make it makes us prone to feel depressed about our situations a lot faster. And I just want to encourage people who are at the start of their journey to remember that when you see any one of our bios or anybody's bio, you're seeing kind of like, the end product, right? Like you just have to remember that sometimes it's not even about what you put as a paragraph that describes yourself. Like there were so many tears and sleepless nights and struggles and almost empty bank accounts that went into a kind of actualizing people. It's just, don't forget the struggle is part of the process. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, because there's a sense of, I hate to use this word, but a thirst for achieving success without putting in the work. And I just want to remind people that you have to kind of go through the process of growth and building yourself. And sometimes that can be painful and lonely, and hopefully everybody has support, but it's not going to be this instant sort of like success.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at struggle. And I've always heard my mother say that there's mercy in misery as long as you're keen on looking for that mercy. As we're just 30 over here, we'll start fielding some questions. And one that sort of pops up is the pursuit of passion beyond your 9 to 5. I think that's been a theme throughout this conversation is find what you're passionate about, and it won't seem like work. But there's also this aspect of having your vocation and then also having your passion projects or things you're doing on the side as well. And Wajiha, you come to mind. I mean, words in Urdu is huge, right? I think I've had 7 people reach out to me in a very within 24 hours, and they're like, "Oh my God, do you have Wajiha on this panel? She's words in Urdu. I'm subscribed to them," and it's really cool. So walk us through how you found that, and how do you find time for that as well?
Well, thank you, Azair, for fueling my ego. But that's always nice to hear, because Words in Urdu started off as just a labor of love. It was, so I guess some context. When I was speaking earlier about, really valuing these skills that may not readily be seen as hard skills and valuable skills, one of those for me when I was studying engineering in undergrad was just preserving my Urdu literacy. So I was born in Rawalpindi, Pakistan. My family immigrated to the US, and so we grew up speaking Urdu. I'm fluent in Urdu, but there came a point in my life where my English was significantly better than my Urdu, and it was something that just really troubled me, especially because I was, at the University of Michigan, this liberal arts school where everyone's talking about colonization and how the colonizer's tongue has become more important than our mother tongue, and I was going through something. So I put a lot of effort into making sure that my Urdu was almost up to par with my English and any other language that I was studying. And it is something that I'm still to this day very, very passionate about. There's something about hearing something in Urdu that just makes me feel a certain kind of way. It's just something very special. And I think, a little bit of that just has to do with it making me feel like home. But without going into that, I had been working on this in undergrad, just like, studying Urdu and studying poetry and literature and all these things that we're devoid of in our, American curriculum, because those are lots of, it's a lot of literature that we don't study, obviously. But it was only up until maybe a year and a half ago, almost 2 years now, where I moved to LA shortly after getting married, and I had time in between getting a job. I was unemployed. And for like the first month, I had told myself that this is my time. As I'm looking for work to continue working in architecture and city planning, I also want to do this project because it's something that keeps me grounded. It's something that is a way for me to stay connected with my co-founder, who's a dear friend of mine in Boston. And that's it. It was a time in some ways similar to what many of us may be going through during the pandemic, where we're furloughed or laid off or choosing to pivot our careers. And that is when I built sort of, again, with my co-founder, kind of built the foundation for Words in Urdu, which just started off as like an Instagram page. And it's just a post a day vocabulary word accompanied with a couplet or literature or a ghazal or something that just keeps it at the palm of our hands, it being the language itself. And this was especially important to me because I, at the time, was in my late 20s and I wasn't living at home and I wasn't surrounded by the language that I would be surrounded by living at my parents' home. So it was a way for me to keep that connection with the language as well. And I think, that starting something as just a project that is not bringing me any money, not bringing me any fame, because I only announced that I'm one of the co-founders for Words in Urdu a few months ago. Like, I was completely anonymous. It was purely something I did just for my own pleasure. I think has kept me sane in 2020, has given me so much purpose and so much clarity in terms of what are the things that I really enjoy, because my job, my career as an architect and urban planner is not the only facet of my identity, right? And now we're seeing Words in Urdu obviously growing to an international level. This was intended for just diaspora babies, and by babies I don't mean like toddlers, I just mean like the diaspora community. But we're seeing it it's being received so well in Pakistan and India, which are regions that have native Urdu speakers that are also experiencing this lack of exposure in some aspect to, these couplets that we bring up and these words that, we don't use in our day-to-day language.
Sorry, Wajia, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just saying that, so now we're seeing it expand beyond what it had started off as an Instagram page to something that's developing into something much larger. And of course, this is still in the works, but the point that I kind of want to wrap up my comment at is that too often we start projects, we call them passion projects, and even in our minds, we put them off as like side hustles or things that we do kind of on the side, which is okay, and it's so important to have those, and it's admirable. Especially because you asked me earlier, how do I make the time for this? It's very, very hard, but it's something that just brings me, it's just so fun. So I find a way to do it during lunch or on the weekends or whatever. But I do want to say that I think about how important it is for our communities, our environments, to be supportive of these kinds of projects without necessarily calling them just, things that we do on the side. Because I think about cities like Los Angeles, for example. Why is it that there is such a large demographic of people that do pursue the entertainment industry, that do pursue being an influencer, whatever you think about that? It's because the environment in the city is set up so that it encourages you to pursue these careers, these industries. And I think about our community as South Asians, as Arabs, as North Africans, like as Muslims. These are language, literature, the arts are a huge component of our legacy in the world. And I think we're in a time where even if you're a dentist, the skill set of creating content, of being able to create these things is now a part of that industry as well. Like I know so many dentists that have Instagram pages because that's just the direction that the world is going in. But my point is just that those things that sometimes we consider side hustles or passion projects, it is okay for them to become our full-time things, or for them to become our small businesses, or for us to become entrepreneurs. And the way that we can make it okay, even more okay, or even more easier to take that plunge, pull that trigger and do this, is if we as a community are supportive of each other's small businesses, if we're supportive of just each other pursuing these careers, these industries, and yeah.
Yeah, it's really well said. And there's so much to net out from that, but there's a few things that I'm just going to cherry pick and move forward. Is one, it sounds like execution is important. Oftentimes, and more often than not, people have great ideas, and you sit there on the couch or at your desk or while you're going for a walk and saying, hey, what if I did this? And I think you're a testament to just put pen to paper and start. And I think for folks that are going through a really hard time right now, or may not have, are in between jobs as well, it's a wonderful thing to fill your resume with and to sort of mitigate the risk of having white space show up on your sort of vocational transcript. And so execution is important, and it just starting somewhere is really important. Now, if we think about folks pursuing a startup, I think this is another thing that sort of stuck out to me. You know, Samia, you have some great experience in the innovation space. And all of us, I think, on the call here may have some sort of tangential knowledge into, or direct knowledge into building a startup. What advice would you give to folks that are thinking through, I think I have an idea, or I'm not sure what to do right now, but man, I wish I could start something. You know, where do people start? What advice would you give them?
I can take this one here. One thing I would recommend is figuring out, well, what is the problem that you want to solve? So, and I don't think that everything needs to be a startup. Like there's no shame or nothing into saying like, I'm starting a small business because my community does not have chai flavored kulfi, and like we need some like good kulfi shop here, right? So not everything needs to be in the next Calendly, Zoom, Facebook, Uber. It's like, what is the problem that you're solving for? So figure out like, you know, first, what is that problem? What is potential for a solution? And then come out with different ways to test your solution in market. So whether that is an idea that you have, let's say you've been laid off and you're finding that you have an experience in, I don't know, fashion and technology, right? And you want to make something that helps solve a problem you've seen in your career so far. And it's been always like something that's pinged you in the back of your head, like, oh, I don't like that. It could be that other people are actually dealing with this pain point. And the only way to find out is by doing user or customer research. Is the problem that you've identified a real problem? And then once you figure that out, you can find out with different ways of either creating a consulting business, a small business, a startup, what have you, to test that out. And one thing I will say is there are so many grants, programs, accelerators, business competitions, and programs with mentorship, free access to resources to help communities, especially communities of color, especially women, in starting and testing businesses. You do not need to be the typical founder. You don't need to have a technical background. Just try to figure out, well, what is the problem I want to solve? And then second, is this a real problem? And there are so many ways to find out and test it and see, does this have legs? And if it does, you just go to the next step.
So Soumya, what you've done really well is articulated finding a consumer pain and then engineering a solution and then testing and iterating and testing and iterating. I feel like, if there's, and I completely agree, right? You have to be consumer obsessed and really solve for pain point as to the why you're doing something. But for folks also, and for folks also looking for tangible ways to accomplish this, I would urge everyone to look into human-centered design and design thinking. There's tons of books, and we'll share them through email with everyone that's joined, on ways to really rapidly prototype and rapidly test and bring things to market that you would be sort of blown away in how easy it is to do if you put some thought behind it.
Yeah, I've seen entrepreneurs who've just simply started something by saying like, hey, I think this is an issue. Let me send this Google Doc survey to 20 of my friends or put it like on Facebook. And then they get a lot of great insights and they find that, okay, so this is a problem that's much bigger than me being annoyed, like, I don't know, booking my eyebrows to be done at the like lady that I see every 2 weeks, right? So like you'd be surprised. And there's so many different paths to entrepreneurship and different things in business that you can do. And a lot of it is you just use your existing skill sets, right? Like let's say you're a researcher, there were some cuts, like are there contracting roles, like are there consulting roles that you can create for yourself and say, hey, I know how to do PCR, and like especially in these areas, I made a website and I'm reaching out with like a one-pager on my potential services to these 5 people that I think might be interesting, and bam, maybe you've started your own business. Who knows?
Soumya, when you said Google Docs, Mishu's eyes opened up really wide.
Whoops.
Sorry, you were saying.
No, as I'll also advocate for all things Google Docs and Google Drive here. But one thing, just adding on to what Soumya said, was the people you work with are going to be such an integral part of that experience. Whatever you're working on, whether it is the best new ways to do technology, fashion, whatever it may be. I think that has been such a key learning for me, of not just in terms of values when it comes to, for example, social justice, or in terms of public health, but really in terms of execution and consistency. So coming up with an idea, there's a thread that every single person has said across this panel, and that's really about consistency and the people that we work with in order to move that forward, whether it's in the personal space or in the work and mentorship space. And so being very intentional and thoughtful and reflective about that is going to be such a change maker as you move ideas forward into reality.
One thing I do want to add is, like, I think we all aspire to a lot of the founder ideals, right? Like, I want to come up with this wonderful idea and I want a company. But once you get to realize how hard it is, and I'm definitely chicken. I am not brave enough to go out and start my own thing, but I know that I need a lot of runway for myself. So some tactical things that I try to do is entrepreneurship, right? Talking to someone and just throwing out a wild idea at work, and one, being brave enough to say something knowing it is so wild and they're probably going to shoot it down or laugh at you, think you're dumb, whatever. But I think we all miss the struggle part of these success stories, right? And part of that struggle is dealing with that rejection and that bravery that comes with trying to sell this weird idea to someone and to a consumer. And then that feedback when you throw out a wild idea and then you realize that the other person actually received it and it wasn't as wild as you thought, like what Soumya was saying. Because I am a big fan of learning on the job and using your job as your training ground, right? So have an idea that you want to try out and try it out at work. It doesn't have to be a side hustle. It doesn't have to be after hours. You can pack it all into your 9 to 5. Because like my after 9 to 5 is like pretty boring.
You know what? I love that, Misha. It's like, be fearless, right? So before the pandemic, I was coaching a youth basketball team, 6th graders in an underprivileged community. And I still remember there was this one kid, and he was so athletic. And he was, right when he got assigned to my team, I'm like, all right, this is my ace in the hole. And Tyler was, he had no confidence in himself, unfortunately. He didn't ask for the ball. He didn't assert himself. And he didn't, as a proxy of that, is he didn't really try, right? And there was a moment in time where I looked at him and I'm like, dude, believe in yourself. You got this. You can do this. Scream for the ball. And then we did this exercise where everybody had to scream for the ball. It's like 10 kids in a gymnasium just screaming ball. And then I'm throwing balls at all of them. And, I'm translating something from 6th grade basketball into the corporate environment, but it nets out to be confident. And Tyler ended up being the MVP for that season. We lost every game, but he did really well, right? So that's, if I can take anything out of what, and a great way to wrap up even is like, be fearless and be confident and be courageous. There is one question over here from someone who says, look, I wish I didn't go into business. Supply chain as a school system is broken here in America. For me, being bipolar, and having symptoms like ADHD, I couldn't grasp concepts and take them with me after graduation unless it was hands-on and taught to me hands-on. What are your thoughts on how different brains learn and how different brains learn differently? And some people don't just memorize PowerPoint slides. Like, what advice would you give somebody coming from that angle?
I think first and foremost, that was a fantastic question. And I'd love to think about how a couple of things that come up in this. First, our education system is not built for how different brains learn, for sure. I mean, starting from preschool on up until you have certain privileges, right? And so there's a lot to unpack there. But for me, the way that I learned best was through those experiential approaches, which are can also be difficult in many ways if you're the desired sort of like the capacity to engage quickly with others, et cetera, might be a little bit of a challenge, right? So I think finding those mentors or those cheerleaders, honestly, who can help support that, bringing it back to the people who you may connect with, who can advance your learning in that way, might be one approach. But I think it also speaks to all of us as leaders. The thing that comes out from your story to me is the fact that you changed the environment so that someone could thrive. And that is, I think, the way that we pay it forward in whatever field or system, whether it's business, academia, the government, whatever we go into, that we must pay it forward so that we accountably change the environment for folks who, whether they're learning differently, whether they are experiencing racial injustice, or whether they are experiencing gender and other biases, that we're really making more inclusive societies so that people can thrive.
One thing I would add, especially like the ADHD part of it, I cannot focus for more than like 10 minutes at a time. I've never been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I have it. So my way around it, because this is something that I've struggled with from like early education till today, I probably have 3 focus days a year. And so the way I get around it is I will like stack what I procrastinate on and have a ton of to-do things going on. So that way, when I am like bouncing around between like focus areas, I'm bouncing around and making progress on all of them, right? Like I have not found a way to get my brain to focus at the times that people expect me to focus from 9 to 5. It also doesn't help that like I work best at 10 p.m. And so just find out, like what Sadia was saying, like you can't always change your entire environment, but you can change your like local environment of how you work. If you know you have 3 things to get done, like trick your brain into telling yourself that your like most important deadline is your lowest priority, and like I will always procrastinate and pick up that one, pick up the one thing that I'm like not supposed to be working on, but I'm making progress in something that I should be making progress on anyways.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. Like just start chiseling away. One thing I want to say is, thank you for asking that question, Shamir. It was really brave. And I want to sort of underscore and overemphasize, if I can, like make sure you're getting BH help if you need it. Talking helps, and BH, even from a virtual health perspective and a telehealth perspective, reimbursements are at parity to in-person visits. So now it's really easy to get care if you need it, and if you need help connecting as well, I'm happy to broker that. Please reach out to me directly. Second to that, I think it's in this virtual world, there's a lot more resources available as well in terms of learning distributed. Like I'm taking Tajweed classes online now, where I was having trouble finding them in person before COVID. That made it like reasonable commute. And I found Mufti in Plano, and it's awesome. So I would say there are resources, and again, if you need help connecting to those resources based on your interests, please reach out to ISGH, reach out to job networking specifically, or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help. With all of that being said, we're almost at 5 Central, and this has been a great session. I'm more pumped and invigorated for the weekend, and for me, it's a long one, so that's great. As we tie things up, I'd love to go around the table here and take parting shots from the group. If you had one piece of advice to give folks during a pandemic and a recession in terms of their vocation, what would that be? And whoever wants to kick off, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and kick off. I would say network. People need to know who you are and what you're interested in. So engaging in conversation, learning and listening.
Love it.
So I'll go next. Whatever you decide to invest in, just remember that you might not see the returns for a while. And so, you might not see returns ever, and that's just life sometimes. With some projects, they fail, and we pick up other projects when they fail. But with a lot of things, you need to keep doing it consistently. And sometimes there's just like a jump, and you finally see the results. So don't get discouraged if you don't see results immediately.
Keep persevering. I love it.
I would say twofold. First, it is a pandemic, and it is okay to take time to not think about your career at this time. It's very easy for us to want to take advantage of this time, and sometimes that's just burdensome. So it's okay to step back. At the same time, I would say it's also okay to leave a bad relationship. And since we're having a professional conversation, I'm specifically talking about a relationship you have with a career. It's risky, and it is scary, especially if many of us have put and invested many, many years of our academic training or just life into a particular career. But it is okay to take this time to reevaluate and leave if it's something that's not giving you fulfillment or joy. And if you want to pivot, now's the time to do it.
I just second everything that everybody said, and also just keep in mind that sometimes it takes more than one attempt to get somewhere. I'm pretty sure all of us have been rejected more times than we've been accepted into things. And so if 1 year it doesn't work out, try again the next year. Sometimes it takes 3 times. So just keep that in mind.
I would, second everything that everyone is saying. This has been an incredible panel. I would say no experience is ever wasted, like good or bad. So anytime you have an experience, like take the time to like pause and reflect on what you've learned from that experience.
I would say just piggyback off of other people. I mean, be brave, try, and maybe you'll succeed, maybe you'll fail. And I think just remember that during this pandemic, like the whole world is on pause. And so that's either an opportunity for you to also be on pause or to make big moves. Like I think there's just this time can be whatever you want it to be.
I love all of that. It's Samia, have you gone?
No, but that's okay. I think for me, what I would say is we spend most of our waking hours working. So spending time to pause and reflect on if I'm going to be spending the majority of my Monday through Friday plus working, how can I do more of what I like and where I learn and less of, the things that make me very unhappy. So any opportunity to explore ways to add more of the percentage of the things you enjoy, I say go for it.
Yeah, I love all of that. It's persevere, keep trying, take your learnings as you go, take a deep breath while you can. And if I were to channel my inner Tyler, it would be call for the ball and be confident and believe in yourself. And then the second piece that I haven't really spoken about is be impact obsessed, right? Like a lot of times people don't think about pursuing vocations that are impact related, but you'll find that you're more content if you know what you're doing is having a positive impact on the communities that you live in or that are around you. With all of that being said, I wanted to start off by thanking ISGH for partnering and allowing us this platform to really reach such a broad audience and to have this wonderful panel of Muslim leaders that I'm humbled to have my box adjacent and next to on this screen. So second to ISGH, thank you to all of you, Mishu, Tahura, Suja, Samia, Sadia, Wajiha, Mashael. And the reason I did that is I'm so proud that I pronounced everyone's name correctly. But also huge thank you. And sort of as a way to wrap a bow around this is, from the people that have registered, we're going to pick some winners, and some of you will get gift cards and other of you will be linked up with one of the panelists. So we'll have 7 winners that will receive one-on-one mentorship with each of the panelists going forward. And we'll make that announcement via email very soon. Again, thank you all so much and have a wonderful weekend.